Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your interest to our site event. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this important site event organized by Bellona. Today we are here to discuss a critical and timely topic, the current state of the Russian Arctic and the far-reaching consequences of Russia's policies, including its aggression against Ukraine, on this fragile and strategically vital region. My name is Yuri Sergeyev and I am a moderator for today's discussion representing Bellona Environmental Transparency Center. As you know, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has drastically altered the political, economic, and environmental landscape of the Arctic. International sanctions, Russia's increasing isolation, and a growing lack of transparency have created significant challenges for monitoring and assessing the region. This has resulted in heightened risks, including military tensions, environmental degradation, climate impacts, and radiation threats, many of which extend far beyond Russia's border. To help us understand these issues in greater depth, we are fortunate to have an expert panel with us today. Let me introduce our distinguished speakers. So, Sigurd Enge, Senior Advisor at Bellona Foundation, who has decades of expertise in addressing issues related to the decarbonization of the shipping sector, Arctic shipping, ship safety, and oil spill response. Ksenia Vakhrusheva, Project Manager and Arctic Project Advisor at Bellona Environmental Transparency Center, specializing in monitoring industrial pollution in Russian Arctic. Dmitry Gorchakov, Nuclear Advisor at Bellona Environmental Transparency Center, will provide insight into the nuclear risk in the region. Andrei Danilov, member of International Committee of Indigenous Peoples of Russia, who will shed light on the impact of developments in the Russian Arctic on indigenous communities. And Rolf Rodwan, Executive Secretary of Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, who will share strategies on how to stay informed about developments in the Russian Arctic during times of war and the lack of trusted sources. Bellona, as many of you know, worked in Russia and has been at the forefront of addressing environmental and climate challenges for nearly 4 decades. Founded in 1986, Bellona is an independent, non-governmental organization with offices in Oslo, Brussels, Berlin, and Vilnius. For almost 30 years, we worked in Russia, in St. Petersburg and Murmansk, in the following spheres: nuclear safety and security, environmental rights, environmental transparency and education, renewable energy, and industrial pollution. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Bellona closed its offices in Russia and relocated employees to Vilnius, Lithuania, to continue analysis of the environmental risk originating in Russia with a focus on nuclear and radiation safety both in Russia and Ukraine, and industrial pollution and climate change in the Arctic. Today's discussion will dive into pressing questions around extractive industries, shipping, nuclear activity, and civil society in the Russian Arctic. Most importantly, we will explore how these issues intersect with Russia's current policies and aggression against Ukraine, and what they mean for the Arctic and the world. Thank you again for joining us for this critical conversation. Once we've heard from all the speakers, there will be time for your questions. I now invite our panelists to share their perspectives, starting with Sigurd Enge. Thank you. Stage is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you to Arctic Frontiers to arrange this conference and to let us bring up the questions we think is crucial for our time. My title is quite clear, and I will try to explain why this conclusion is so clear. Let's see, don't know where to point. There.
Yeah, it works.
We have already known for many years that the sea ice is declining. It's warmer climate, warmer water, and less sea ice. So does it mean that it's more accessible for shipping activities along the northern sea route? I'm sorry to say no. Simply because when it's lesser sea ice, that makes more open water. And open water and wind makes waves. Um, and in summertime, that's not a big problem, but in wintertime, there will be ice and um, low temperatures in the winter, as long as we can see forward. It's even if it's the temperature rise from 25 to 20 degrees minus, it's very cold and very icy. So you get ice on the vessels, which makes things not function. You make the stability of the ship poor, and so it's not a good idea. The other thing is that when the ice is when it's lesser ice, it moves faster by the wind and the sea current. So it's much harder to plan what kind of route you should take and what kind of condition you meet during that time, simply because things are changing much faster. And with the extreme weather, which is a part of the Arctic climate change, that will be a problem. Search and rescue is a necessary part of how to deal with any transportation anywhere in the world. And let's see. There. You see, this is a kind of centers of search and rescue along the route. So there is a plan of search and rescue, but the distances along the Northern Sea route is the same as it always has been. And when it's harsh condition, then it takes time to reach out. And when it's a problem for a ship, time is one of the most crucial elements. And then, of course, when you have problems with a ship, you risk to have a oil spill when it goes aground, collides, or capsize, or whatever happens. Then oil spill preparedness should be the way to reduce the impact of the nature hitting by the oil spill. And as I said earlier, when it's lesser ice, then you get more waves, then the efficiency of the oil booms, they goes down. When it's more than 2 meter waves, they are practically not functioning at all. So, and this is not specific for Russia. It's a problem pan-Arctic, that when you have an oil spill in Arctic waters, where it's dark in the winter, it's icy, and so, it's not a proper tool to reduce the environmental impact. So that's not a good idea. I think I need some more minutes to... and this is simply a map of the oil spill preparedness centers. It's about the same kind of sectorized part of the Northern Sea route. And in oil preparedness and to save the to collect the oil, time is very important. When time the oil spill goes more and more out into the sea, and it's harder to collect. It's thinner, the layer of oil, and the efficiency goes fast down. And sea current has the same effect. So this is a picture from a Norwegian oil spill operation. And when it's a lot of sea ice, it's impossible to split the oil and the ice. And if you collect all the ice too, then you have a big job. So, a bad idea. This is one picture of seabirds along the Northern Sea route. And I won't go deep into this, but wherever on this route you have an accident or an oil spill or whatever environmental impact, the seabirds, which are decreasing all over the world, and especially in the Arctic region. So, and of course, the main thing in Arctic shipping is safety. How to be prepared, how to be equipped, and how to deal with the rougher conditions which are there. And there is two main regulations in the IMO, the International Maritime Organization. It's the Polar Code, which is defining some of the equipment you need to have, and the training the crew should have to be prepared to deal with these problems you can reach in the Arctic waters. And the heavy fuel oil ban, which also is a very good thing, but it takes time because it's all the Arctic nations can give a paper that say you are allowed until 2029. There is an opening for doing that. So if you combine these rules with the shadow fleet, which is one of the things that has changed the last years in the Arctic waters of Russia, then you increase the risk. You see that there. This is the number of tons that has been transported along the Northern Sea route, and this light bars, they are the ambition of the Russian government. So it is rising very slow, but the ambition, which has been high since the 80s. So I will finish with this. This is kind of crude oil is the biggest one, and bulk and container and so and so. It's rising, and the condition of the ships are going down, and this is the situation not good. Hope you understood my conclusions now.
Thank you, Sigurd. So, and the next is Ksenia Vakhruseva with her presentation about developments in Russian Arctic. So, please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Yuri.
I guess it works.
Thank you. Yeah, it works now. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, you will see my presentation in a couple of seconds. And I think the name of my presentation also kind of reflects the main message that I want to give you. So I will give an overview of the current state and perspectives of the extractive industry in the Russian Arctic, basically on the land part of the Arctic and its environmental and climate consequences. You know that the Arctic is in principle very rich with different kind of natural resources, especially hydrocarbons and different metals. And Russia, back then Soviet Union, has been digging them up actively since 17th and 80s previous century. Here you can see shares of resources extracted in the Arctic compared to the whole Russia. So roughly 83% of natural gas is extracted in the Russian Arctic, 17% of oil, 100% of diamonds, 19% of nickel and cobalt, 60% of copper. And there is an ambition, according to Russian plans, to rise these shares, especially for oil and gas. Most of those resources are extracted for export, and you will see the impact of that later. The pollution in the Russian Arctic is not a new thing. It has been going on since 70s, 80s of the last century. And here you can see that existing industry has already left serious environmental impact in many Arctic areas. These are examples of 4 clusters where this impact was mainly noticeable. And also it is worth to mention that all those industrial sites were constructed by Gulag prisoners that time. And without involvement of or taking into account interests of the local population. So the people who worked there didn't have a connection with the land and with the environment, with their community there. Basically, more or less the same thing is going on now as well, because mine workers on the new mining sites are also not local people. They come to work in shifts. And also don't have this connection with communities and the local population. Next here you can see the map of super polluters. That's 300 industrial sites which produce more than 60% of emissions in Russia. And 30 of these sites are located in the Russian Arctic. Mostly this is oil and natural gas fields, nickel, copper and coal mining. In the next table you can see emissions and waste from those 30 sites. They are owned by 9 companies and represent 5 industries. According to data from Russia's Environmental Oversight Agency, polluting emissions figures self-reported by Russian enterprises show that Norilsk Nickel and Gazprom lead all others by a significant margin. So the emissions of greenhouse gases are also huge. And even though data on greenhouse gases are grossly underestimated by Russian Oversight Environmental Agency Rosprirодnadzor, their presence in the Russian Arctic is nonetheless far greater than in any other Arctic country. For example, Gazprom's Arctic operations emit roughly the same as every source, including transport in Alaska. It is also 1.5 times greater than emissions from all industries in Canada's Arctic provinces, including non-Arctic southern Quebec. These numbers are quite old, from 2021, And there is a reason for that, because since then there was no update of the emissions, and now there is basically impossible to get the open information about emissions from each particular site. Nonetheless, Russia has very ambitious plans to develop and to mine more in the Russian Arctic. And here are some of the targets for extractive industry in the strategy for till 2035. So more oil and gas extraction, more mining. And at the same time, we see in the strategy that there is no targets for emissions or discharges. There is a overall sentence that emissions should be minimized, but there is no concrete targets and there is no concrete plans how to do it. The next table shows more concrete which kind of mining sites are developing right now, with the proposed years when they should start their operations until 2030. Some of them are almost ready to start production. Construction of others has not yet been started. But if all those projects go into operation, it will add at least 25 million tons of greenhouse gases and at least 1.4 million of toxic air pollutants from production only. Mainly, of course, from oil and gas projects, and a lot of waste from metal mining. You see in red that those projects were to start in last year, in 2024, but it didn't happen because of the effect of sanctions. It doesn't mean that they will stop their operations, it just delays them. Maybe some of them, like big LNG projects, will be delayed significantly more. Some of them, like Vostok Oil, might start operations sooner, but we're not certain about that yet. And as I said earlier, most of resources extracted in the Russian Arctic go for export. Sadly, after 3 years of the ongoing Russian war in Ukraine, a big part of Russian resources are still traded in Europe. 16.7 million of LNG were exported to the EU last year. It is even more than in 2023 and more than during pre-war years. Natural gas from the Russian Arctic goes to Europe not only as LNG. 1.78 million of urea fertilizers were exported to the EU last year. It is also more than in 2023 and a bit less than in 2021. Nickel and some other metals are still traded, although in much less quantities than pre-war. Arctic oil goes to Russia, to Asia, probably on shadow fleet tankers, and then might go to Europe as oil products. This is difficult to spot. Here are some examples of environmental pollution that we should expect on the next slides during the next years. For example, pollution from the gold mining. Alluvial mining of gold had already polluted thousands of kilometers of rivers in southern Siberia and Far East, and it will inevitably bring same kind of pollution to the Arctic, as a lot of new sites were given for exploration and mining there, specifically for alluvial mining of gold. So lack of state control, low fines, and high profitability makes companies neglect environmental regulations, even if they are there. Another example is coal pollution in Chukotka. And this is an example of how interests of health and the local indigenous people are not taken into account. Coal dust covers Arctic surface, badly influencing vegetation and health of locals. Miners work on the rotation basis, as I previously told you, and don't have any connection with the land, while locals are fully dependent on authorities and mining company in supplies. It makes impossible and sometimes dangerous for them to raise voice against malpractices of the business. Andrei will talk more about this situation in his presentation. There is also a big concern about potential oil spill and what can be consequences of that. Sigurd already told you in his presentation, so I'm not gonna talk about it. But lastly, I would like to stress that all this mining development is happening while there is almost no, I can say now, not almost, but at all no public control. All international environmental organizations were pressed away or went out of the country. Local organizations in the Arctic were weak then and now almost not working at all. As you can see, the availability of environmental information is severely decreasing. They stopped publishing data after the war slowly. There is no pollution data reliable from each source. There is no data on how much oil and gold they extract every day. And environmental organizations are now substituted with the GONGOs, governmental dependent organizations. So, my conclusions, what we can see and expect. So we should expect increase in pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from extractive industry in the Russian Arctic in the coming decade. Russian data on industrial emissions cannot be trusted. There is high risk of oil spill in the Arctic waters due to shadow fleet and increased shipping of oil to the eastern part. And Russian Arctic natural resources should be banned on the international markets, both for environmental reasons and to limit Russia's capacity to continue its war against Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia. So, and we have our next, all the questions will be when we will finish with all the speakers. So, and I am inviting Dmitry Gorchakov, who will speak about nuclear risk and nuclear legacy in Arctic. Please.
Hello, everyone. The room is full, so thank you very much for this huge attention and interest to our Belona's event. I will speak about nuclear activities in Russian Arctic and nuclear risk related with them. Does it work? Yeah, this is the name. Okay. Nuclear activity in the Arctic region of Russia has been going on for over 70 years. More than 100 nuclear explosions were conducted here, and more than 100 nuclear-powered submarines, military ships, and civilian vessels were built, operated, and decommissioned here. Several nuclear power plants, dozens of military bases, and other facilities with radioactive materials were built and still operated here. And of course, there were a lot of radiation accidents. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, most of these facilities were left in a very dangerous state, forming the so-called nuclear legacy. History shows that when a major nuclear state collapses due to economic problems and military expenses, it creates significant risks for everyone around it. We know it from the past. But we may face this again in the future when the Putin's regime collapses, sooner or later. Bellona has been actively involved in solving nuclear legacy problems for about 30 years. Firstly, simply drawing attention to them and then actively promoting international assistance in eliminating them. But the good news is that many of the nuclear legacy problems have been solved, including with foreign assistance in the form of technology and finance. European countries, including Norway, have spent about 2.5 billion euros to address these problems. Among the resolved problems, we can name Saida Bay, where reactor compartments of nuclear submarines are securely stored, more than 120 compartments. And service ship Lepse, a floating storage facility for spent nuclear fuel, which was finally disposed of last year. A partially solved problem is Andreeva Bay, This is a storage site for more than 20,000 spent fuel assemblies of the Northern Fleet, just 40 kilometers from the Norwegian border. The base was brought to a safe state, and since 2016, a half of the fuel has already been removed from here, but the second half, more complex and more dangerous, remains. The problem of sunken objects is no less important than Andreeva Bay. There are about 10 nuclear reactors at the bottom of the Arctic seas. The most dangerous are the sunken submarines K-27 and K-159. The issue of raising them was discussed until 2022 between Russia and foreign partners. However, it is unlikely that Russia will be able to raise them alone, both to the lack of necessary technologies and money, and maybe it's more important because this is not a priority for Russia today. Russia's main focus now is confront to the West. Most of the nuclear legacy comes from past military programs, but nuclear militarization of the Arctic is still ongoing. By early 2025, the Russian Northern Fleet has around 25 nuclear ships and submarines. The Russian Navy remains the main operator of nuclear installations in the Russian Arctic. It operates about 40 nuclear reactors, in comparison with 25 in civilian programs. And no less important is that they have about 300 nuclear warheads on combat duty on their strategic submarines. In recent decades, Russia has built over 10 new nuclear submarines, one of them you can see on this slide, and is developing new nuclear weapon carriers. Russia spent more than $10 billion every year for modernization of its nuclear arsenals. This will create a new nuclear legacy in the future and poses risk of accidents during testing and operation already today. Here are some of the biggest accidents with nuclear facilities in the Arctic over the last 25 years. One example is a well-known tragedy of the Kursk submarine, which sank during Putin's first year as president. Another well-known example is a more recent accident during the testing of new weapons. In 2019, there was an accident with a nuclear reactor for the Burevestnik cruise missile. This caused a radiation release in the Arkhangelsk region and the death of 5 Rosatom's engineers and scientists. Now these tests have been moved to another site in the Arctic, to Novaya Zemlya. Speaking of Novaya Zemlya, this test site has seen over 130 nuclear explosions. Fortunately, no full-scale nuclear tests have been conducted here since 1990. However, the site has never been closed and is deliberately kept ready for use. This is a part of Putin's strategy to intimidate the West. In recent years, he has taken a lot of steps toward nuclear escalation. Last year, Russia withdrew its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And in a year, the New START treaty between the United States and Russia will expire. This means that likely next year, we don't know what will be between Trump and Putin, but likely next year, for the first time in decades, we will find ourselves in a situation where there are no treaties between the two largest nuclear powers limiting their nuclear arsenals. Potentially, this will allow Russia very fast to place up to 100 additional warheads on existing submarines in the Arctic. Unfortunately, if the nuclear escalation continues, then in a few years we may well see the resumption of nuclear testing at the Novaya Zemlya, the very activity that Bellona opposed 35 years ago. In addition to military activities, Russia is also developing civilian nuclear projects in the Arctic. They are closely connected with the extractive industrial project in this region, which Ksenia has already spoken about. The main example of civilian use of nuclear technologies in the Arctic is nuclear icebreakers. They have been used on the Northern Sea route for 65 years. Today, there are 8 nuclear icebreakers working here. There is more than in Soviet times. Half of these icebreakers are new and were commissioned in the last 5 years. And Russia plans to build 4 more. But in recent years, these plans have faced problems. First, the war in Ukraine has caused a breakdown in industrial cooperation with many European countries and Ukraine itself. Second, there is less governmental funding for building icebreakers. And third, the region's economic development, which needs icebreakers, is lower than expected. Sigurd already mentioned it. Last year, the plan was to transport 80 million tons of cargo along the Northern Sea route. But in reality, it was only half that amount. Russia is also broadly uses nuclear energy in the Arctic. Out of 11 nuclear power plants in Russia, 3 are located in this region, in Arctic. 2 of them, Kola and Bilibino, have been working for more than 50 years. In the future, Russia plans to build 5 new nuclear power plants in the Arctic with a total number of reactors of up to 16. Both in Soviet times and today, Russia chosen the Arctic for special nuclear installation due to its extreme specific conditions. Currently, Rosatom, the Russian nuclear corporation, is planning to build new reactor types in the Arctic, unlikely anything built elsewhere in Russia. These technologies are being tested here with the goal of future export. Because we may classify most of these projects as small modular reactors, which is a new direction in nuclear energy development that many countries are currently interested in, even Norway. Most of these reactors in Russia are intended to power industrial projects in remote areas. However, the success of these projects depends on the export of extracted resources. With sanctions on Russia, it's unlikely that all of these projects will be completed. So let me conclude my speech with by repeating the key points. First, nuclear legacy issues are still dangerous and unresolved. In the current situation, nuclear cleanup projects may slow down or stop indefinitely. Second, new risks arise from ongoing nuclear militarization of the Arctic. Third, the lack of reliable information from Russia makes these problems even worse and harder to respond to. Bellona is working to address this by publishing analytical materials and monitoring the situation in the Russian Arctic and in Russian nuclear industry. And I recommend you to subscribe to our Arctic and Nuclear Digest. And last but not least, I can repeat what Ksenia already mentioned at this point. Sanctions and pressure on Russia are slowing its Arctic projects. So Russian Arctic natural resources should be banned on the international markets, both for environmental reasons and to limit Russia's capacity to continue its war against Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. And I'm inviting our next speaker. It's Andrei Danilov. He will tell us how the situation influence on indigenous communities. Andrei will have his speech in Russian, and I will translate it.
Здравствуйте. Для коренных народов мира очевидна связь с природой, нашей землей. Природа и коренные народы – это единое целое. Ущерб, наносимый природе, является нашей болью в сердце. Все наше существование издревле связано с природой, и мы стараемся сохранить все то, что досталось от наших предков, и передать последующим поколениям.
For the world's indigenous peoples, the connection with nature and our earth is clear. Nature and indigenous peoples are one. Damage to nature is our pain, a pain in the heart. Our entire existence has been bound up with nature since ancient times. We strive to preserve all that has been passed down to us by our ancestors and to pass it to our future generations.
В последнее время все больше появляется разработки полезных ископаемых на наших землях. Только в Мурманской области планируется 3 крупных месторождения.
Recently, there has been an increase in the extraction of natural resources on our lands. For example, in the Murmansk region, 3 mining projects are planned.
Первое – это разработка платоноидного месторождения в Федоровых тундрах. Компания Fedorov Resources, компания уже заявила, что на этих землях не ведутся традиционные виды деятельности, что не соответствует действительности.
The first is the development of the Fedorova Tundra platinum group metals deposit by the company Fedorova Resources. The company has already claimed that there is no traditional activities carried out on these lands, which is not true.
Второе – Калмазерское месторождение лития. Новая компания «Полярный литий» создана крупнейшими компаниями «Норильский никель» и госкорпорацией «Росатом». Это месторождение расположено на землях, где сейчас ведется традиционный вид деятельности оленеводства. И эти земли навсегда будут потеряны для моего народа Саами. А так как этот металл литий нужен в том числе для военной промышленности России, то освоение этого месторождения ведется ускоренными темпами. Полярный литий проводит так называемые консультации с народом Саами. Компания создала сайт и привлекла международных экспертов, но это лишь видимость диалога и соблюдения принципа «спос в пик». На самом деле это не является диалогом, а является информированием народа Саами об уничтожении их земель. Это диалог с пистолетом у виска.
The second is the Kalmozerskaya lithium deposit. A new company, Polar Lithium, was created by 2 major industrial companies, Norilsk Nickel and the state corporation Rosatom. This deposit is located on lands currently used for traditional activities like reindeer herding. These lands will be forever lost to my people, the Saami. Since lithium is in demand for military industries in Russia, the development of this deposit is being accelerated. Polar Lithium is conducted so-called consultations with the Saami people. The company created a website and engaged international experts, but this is merely the appearance of the dialogue and adherence to FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent principles. In reality, it's not a dialogue at all, but a mere bulletin to the Saami people about the destruction of their lands. It's a dialogue with a gun to the head.
Третье – посттундровское месторождение лития. Arctic Lithium – совместное предприятие Халмик и химическое месторождение металлургического завода. Спокойно продвигает свой проект в полмост-тундра с момента получения на разработку в 2023 году. Как указано на сайте компании, миссия Arctic Lithium заключается в производстве высококачественной литиевой продукции с уважением к окружающей среде и содействием устойчивому развитию. Но тем не менее на сайте отсутствует конкретное упоминание о Саами и оценка воздействия на окружающую среду. Кольские Саами выразили обеспокоенность по поводу воздействия на окружающую среду и угрозы для выпаса оленей, создаваемые этим горнодобывающим проектом, который рискует еще больше посягнуть на земли предков, на землю их предков. Река Воронья, прилегающая к месторождению, является важным рыболовным ресурсом для Саами, известным своей разнообразной популяцией рыбы. Тем не менее, Arctic Lithium не работает над содержательным диалогом с Саами.
The third project is Polmostundra lithium deposit. Arctic Lithium, a joint venture between TD Halmek and the chemical and metallurgical plant, has quietly promoted its project in Polmostundra since acquiring development rights in 2023. According to the company's website, Arctic Lithium's mission is to produce high-quality lithium products with respect for the environment and to promote sustainable development. However, the website does not specifically mention the Saami or provide environmental impact assessment. The Kola Saami have expressed concerns about the environmental impact and the threats to reindeer pastures posed by the mining project, which risks further encroachment on their ancestral lands. The Voronia River, adjacent to the deposit, is an important fishing resource for the Saami, known for its diverse fish populations. Nonetheless, Arctic Lithium has not engaged in meaningful dialogue with the Saami.
Не могу не обойти вниманием и пример с ветрогенераторами. В Мурманской области установлено 57 огромных ветроэнергетических установок, при этом никаких консультаций с коренным народом Саами не велось. Приведу цитату из российского СМИ. Любопытно, что Кольская ВЭС – источники не только электроэнергии, но и зрелищ. Ветропарк расположен вдоль дороги, соединяющей федеральную трассу Кола с Серебрянским ГЭС и старинным поморским селом Териберкой, куда в год приезжает более 50 тысяч туристов. Все они едут по этой дороге и имеют возможность любоваться ветряками, словно парящими над горизонтом. Это величественное зрелище. Вот так, одним росчерком пера журналистов, самское поселение стало поморским, и это зрелище для туристов. А для нас это боль и уничтожение оленьих пастбищ нашей земли.
I cannot overlook the example of wind turbines. In the Murmansk region, 57 massive wind turbines have been installed without any consultations with the indigenous Sami people. Here is a quote from a Russian media outlet. The curious thing is that the Kola wind farm is not only a source of electricity, but also a spectacle. The wind farm is located along the road connecting the federal highway Kola with the Serebryanskaya hydroelectric plants and the ancient Pomor village of Teribirka, which attracts over 50,000 tourists annually. They all travel along this road and can admire the wind turbines soaring over the horizon. It's a majestic sight. Thus, with the stroke of the journalist's pen, a Sami settlement became a Pomor village, and for tourists it is a spectacle. For us, it's the pain of destroyed reindeer pastures, our land.
В Норвегии подобная ситуация. Напомню, дело Фусен. В 2021 году, через 5 лет после начала строительства и через год после его завершения, Верховный суд Норвегии признал ветропарк незаконным, но ветрогенераторы стоят до сих пор.
A similar situation exists in Norway. Recall the Fossen case. In 2021, 5 years after construction began and the year after completion, Norway's Supreme Court declared the wind farm illegal, yet the turbines still stand.
Так называемое освоение российской Арктики происходит с грубейшими нарушениями норм международного права. Каковы последствия для коренных народов? Мы теряем свои земли. Уничтожается природа. Мы теряем возможность заниматься традиционными видами деятельности. Без этого мы исчезаем. Готовы ли мы поддерживать народы ради благосостояния олигархов и провластного бизнеса? Как сохранить народы – наша главная задача. Именно поэтому мы должны принимать эффективные меры, но вырабатывать решения и обсуждать необходимо вместе с коренными народами на основе норм международного права, с уважением к обычаям и самобытности коренных народов.
The so-called development of the Russian Arctic occurs with blatant violations of international law. What are the consequences for indigenous peoples? We lose our lands, nature is destroyed, and we lose the ability to engage in traditional activities. Without this, we vanish. Are we ready to sacrifice people for the prosperity of oligarchs and state-affiliated businesses? Preserving indigenous peoples is our primary task. That is why we must take effective measures, but these solutions must be developed and discussed together with indigenous peoples based on international law and with respect for their customs and uniqueness.
Как ведется диалог в современных условиях? Приведу один пример, который зафиксирован 5 июня 2022 года в селе Лавозеро проходило мероприятие в форме консультаций по калмазерскому месторождению лития с Сами и местными жителями. Галина Шебут, глава сельского поселения Лавозеро, сказала: «Может быть, ответ на него будет интересен патриотически настроенным жителям нашей страны. Я думаю, таких сейчас большинство. Я обычный житель страны, и как большинство. Является ли это производство, которое сейчас инициировано, частью импортзамещения в связи с текущими событиями? Население должно понимать, насколько это важно в текущем моменте». Поясню, что текущим моментом в России называют войну в Украине. Таким образом, мы видим, что власти прямо заявляют, что это производство важно для России в условиях войны в Украине.
What does dialogue look like today? Here is an example. On June 5, 2022, an event in the Forum of Consultations on the Kalmozero lithium deposit was held in the village of Lavozero with the Saami and local residents. Galina Shebut, head of the Lavozero Village Council, said, "Perhaps the answer will interest patriotic citizens of our country. I think they are now the majority. I am an ordinary resident of this country, like most. Is this production, which has now been initiated, part of import substitution in connection with current events? The population must understand how important it is in the current moment. And let me explain. Current moment in Russia refers to the war in Ukraine. Thus, we see authorities openly stating that this production is essential for Russia during the war in Ukraine."
Также на этой встрече с критиком проекта выступили два лидера самского движения Александр Слупачик и Андрей Жвавый, которые впоследствии были вынуждены покинуть Россию и попросить политическое убежище в Норвегии. Мы не должны стоять в стороне и наблюдать, как при помощи провластных, нерукопожатных представителей коренных народов нарушаются наши права.
At the same meeting, two leaders of the Saami movement, Alexander Slupachuk and Andrei Zhvavy, criticized the project. Subsequently, they were forced to leave Russia and seek political asylum in Norway. We must not stand aside and watch as rights are violated with the help of state-affiliated, untrustworthy representatives of indigenous peoples.
Что же происходит сейчас в России, как повлияла война в Украине на коренные народы? Скажу прямо, в тоталитарном государстве Россия нет никаких прав у граждан. Да, мы видим, что на международных площадках выступают представители коренных народов из России и говорят, как все замечательно. Существующая организация «Райпон», которая была создана в 90-х годах и отстаивала права коренных народов, но сейчас она превратилась в гонго-организацию, полностью подконтрольную властям, ФСБ и промышленным компаниям. Имеется расследование по ее деятельности.
What is happening in Russia now, and how has the war in Ukraine affected indigenous peoples? Frankly, in the totalitarian state of Russia, citizens have no rights. Yes, we see representatives of Russia's indigenous peoples speaking at international platforms, praising the situation. There is an organization, Raipon, created in the 1990s to defend indigenous peoples' rights, but it has now turned into a so-called Gongo, or governmental organized non-governmental organization, completely controlled by the authorities, the FSB and industrial companies. Investigations have been conducted into its activities.
В конце июля 2024 года Минюст внес в реестр экстремистских организаций сразу 55 организаций. Их признали структурными подразделениями запрещенной несуществующей организации антироссийское сепаратистское движение. В список попали организации коренных народов России на международных площадках, например, Международный комитет народов России, ICPR, Абориген форум, информационное агентство Indigenous Russia и другие. Новый экстремистский статус сильно осложнит работу объединений в России. За взаимодействие с ними гражданам будет грозить в том числе и уголовная ответственность.
In late July 2024, the Ministry of Justice of Russian Federation added 55 organizations to the register of extremist entities. This includes organizations of Russian indigenous peoples on international platforms, like the International Committee of Indigenous Peoples of Russia, Aborigen Forum, and the news agency Indigenous Russia. Their new extremist status will significantly complicate their work in Russia. Citizens interacting with them may face criminal charges.
22 ноября 2024 года Верховный суд Российской Федерации по иску Генерального прокуратура признал теоретической международную организацию «Форум свободных государств пост России», созданную в форме общественного движения в Польше в 2022 году.
On November 2022-2024, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation declared the international organization Forum of Free States of Post-Russia, established as a public movement in Poland in 2022, to be terrorist.
Она состоит из 172 структурных подразделений, организованных по национальному и региональному признаку. В список также попали организации, в числе которых Абориген форум и Международный комитет коренных народов России, ICPR.
It includes 172 subdivisions organized by national and regional principles. The list also includes organizations such as the Aborigen Forum and the International Committee of Indigenous Peoples of Russia.
В завершение приведу цитату из фильма «Бунт Каутакейна Оператор». О некоторых вещах трудно говорить, но молчание ни к чему не приводит. Мы должны говорить и пытаться понять, даже тогда, когда нет никакой надежды. Надежда не умирает, она переселяется в новые сердца, как весенний ветер, который приносит запах лета.
I'll conclude with a quote from the film The Kautokeino Rebellion. Some things are hard to talk about, but silence leads nowhere. We must speak and try to understand, even when there is no hope. Hope does not die, it moves to new hearts, like a spring wind bringing the scent of summer.
Кихту, тюсин так, спасибо за внимание, Андрей Данилов, сами.
Thank you for your attention, Andrei Danilov Sami. So, and I invite last. Okay, and I invite last but not least our speaker, Rolf Rodwan. Please, stage is yours.
Thank you so much. It's microphone 3 for the technician. Good morning, everyone. For those of you, my name is Rolf Rødven. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program. And for those of you that now are a bit confused by my outfit, I can reveal to you that there's a secret plan of Arctic indigenous people to take over the control globally. Usually I have a suit, so we go under for cover to infiltrate, but this morning I went to the phone booth and did some rapid changing and so on. More seriously, it was to honor the memory of Dr. Robert Corral, who passed away in January in the previous session. I would like my talk to focus on like the more global perspective or the Arctic regional perspective. It may seem kind of a contrast to some of the previous messages, but I think that's something we all can discuss later on. What I will talk a bit about is why is the Arctic, well, let's say a bit about the history of the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program and the Arctic Council. I will talk a bit about like why is the Arctic important when it comes to environmental issues. What have the Arctic Council done since 2022, or AMAP done since 2022? What do we lose without Russia in a global context, or Russian data in a global context? How did we deal with that from AMAP's side? And I also try to look a bit into or talk a bit about the state where we are now, and maybe try to look a bit into the future. That is kind of hard, given how times are now. So, the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program actually was initiated from the previous major change in what was then the Soviet Union. So it's actually a consequence of the speech done by Gorbachev in 1989, opening against the West. And in 1991, there was established what was called the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy, where the Arctic states came together, realizing the Arctic is not as pristine as they thought it were. So they decided to collaborate on environmental issues, which is quite easy topic to agree to collaborate on. So 4 of the working groups, the Arctic Council was established then, AMAP among them. In 1996, when the Arctic Council was established, AMAP was organized as a working group to the Arctic Council. And since the very beginning, we've been focusing on monitoring and assessing trends and levels of contaminants as well as climate change in the Arctic, how it affects ecosystems as well as livelihoods, how they interact, and also including how they affect human health. This we bring forward to the international arena for international regulation. So our work have, for instance, led to the Stockholm Convention, regulating persistent organic pollutants, and the Minamata Convention regulating mercury. So why is the Arctic so important? Well, it's important in itself, and I mean, I grew up in the Arctic. It's my homeland. I grew up 2 hours away from the Russian border. So the Arctic is, for me, of course, important. However, it's very important in a global scale. The Arctic has some features which makes it really important as a global indicator of the environmental state. Like, for instance, when it comes to contaminants, it is really the Arctic is kind of canary bird of the globe, and when it comes to contaminants, it's really a sensitive indicator. Like, contaminants are brought up to the Arctic, they do accumulate in the biota, and they do magnify, and they due to the subsistence hunting and so on, it have human health effects. And because there's very few sources in the Arctic, it leads to the need for international regulation. And that was the background for the establishment of the Stockholm Convention and the UN and the Minamata Convention, as earlier mentioned. Also, when it comes to climate change, the Arctic is, literally speaking, a hotspot. We tend to think of climate change as something new that have come up through the last 20, 30 years. But honestly, it has been described for a long time. 1856, a very genius woman called Eunice Foote described the heat capacity of carbon dioxide. And she even said in her paper that an increase of concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will lead to an increase in the temperature. This is almost 170 years ago. For 100 years, we tried to understand what she said and tried to elaborate it. For the next 40 years, we tried to see what that could mean. And for the last 30 years, we have tried to explain why we didn't act earlier. So it's not really new. The Arctic is, and we've been working with this for 30 years, the Arctic is warming up 3 times as fast as the global rates. Since 1971, the temperature has increased by 3.1 degrees or something. Parts of the Arctic, like Svalbard and Nova Zembla, heats up 6 to 7 times as fast as the global average. It's really happening fast. I was just up in my homelands with a group of young participants on what we call the Arctic Youth Expedition, and we also hear the reindeer herders talking about like how the weather conditions have completely changed now, how you have these rapid fluctuations between what we experience, like plus 7 degrees and a full storm, to minus 35 degrees in just a couple of days. And that really impacts the people living up there. What is also important is some of these are what we call tipping points. That is, changes that can happen abruptly and irreversibly on a relevant time scale. Like, for instance, wildfires, permafrost thaw, and ocean acidification. Half of the tipping points described in the world do exist in the Arctic. And, well, how much do they have to say? Let's say, we all remember the wildfires on the Canadian side. The emissions from the wildfires on the Canadian side in 2022 was about 2,400 megatons of CO2. How much is that? Well, if you take the whole record of Canada from 1991 till 2022, you have the highest year was 1997. You take the anthropogenic or man-made emissions from that year, and you have to multiply it by 3 to come up to the emissions from the wildfires. So it's really important for the globe. In 2022, just after the break of the war in Ukraine, the Arctic Council and AMAP went into what is called a strategic pause. So where we stopped or paused all the work we were doing. The secretariat, which I represent, is neutral. So we kept our work going because with the legal bodies we had to do. That lasted until August last year, August the same year when we started what we call partial resumption. And since this spring, we have had a resumption of the work of the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program, and as well as the Arctic Council, including also Russian experts and Russian delegates. We are now, in a couple of weeks, we will launch our radioactivity report, which includes like an American lead author, a Norwegian lead author, and a Russian lead author. For us, when we came into this stage, for us, for AMAP, we're a scientific body bringing forward scientific evidence to policymakers. For us, it was all about scientific integrity, to make sure that our data was respected in the same way as before. So a lot of our work were kept on hold because the researchers said we do not leave anyone behind. That would be scientific misconduct to do so. And we kept on to that. The reason for doing that is we knew that also Russian data do have an importance for when we discuss climate change on a global scale. We often think of Arctic as a homogeneous environment. However, if you exclude Russian taiga from the measurements we have, and this is very neatly described in a paper about the Interact project, you will offset those models by 80 years. When it comes to permafrost, 2/3 of the permafrost is located in Russia. If you exclude the Russian data, you will decrease your understanding of the information you get with about half. Permafrost thaw by the end of the century, under the current emission scenarios, are predicted to release greenhouse gas emissions on the same level as a larger industrial state, and some claim it will be to the same levels as China or US. So this was something we take into account on the way we acted. So where are we now? Well, as I said, we are starting to collaborate, or we are resuming our work. We are starting to publishing. Russia have been contributing with co-authors to our experts, to our expert groups. They have been feeding in feedbacks on those reports we're about to launch. And they have been feeding in initiatives on the coming work plan. When it comes to data, that is, of course, too early to say, because we are now about to initiate the next cycle. So we will still need to see where we're going. We know that some of the data are sensitive. We still receive what is called essential weather data, for instance, but all those other data about permafrost thaw, for instance, are not among those essential weather data, and that would be really important for us to see. I would like to end it on a more, in a hopeful note, if not a positive note, and that is we do have some common goals. There are some mechanisms. We do have what is called Arctic Scientific Agreement, or the Arctic Agreement on Scientific Collaboration, which do state the need to exchange data. It do state the intelligence property rights of indigenous peoples. And also we have the International Polar Year 2032 and 2033, which could be a kind of a target if we would like to bring forward Arctic data on the regional scale of the full Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. And also I would like to say thank you to all the speakers for being responsible to stay in time, that letting us enough time for questions. And I would like to invite all the speakers to the stage, please. So, and we have a microphone in the hall, so please introduce yourself before asking the question, say where you're from and to which speaker you are addressing your question. So I see some hands. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Margaret Williams. I'm with the Arctic Initiative at Harvard University's Belfer Center. I want to thank the panel, especially want to thank Bellona, because it takes incredible courage to do what you're doing and to speak publicly. And it's really, really important. And Andre, especially, thank you for not being silent. My question goes back to the issue of oil spills in the Arctic, as there has been finally more Western press about the oil spill in the Kerch Strait and Putin's reaction, and apparently he recently called for an inspection of the oil tanker fleet, and it seems like the Kerch oil spill is solidifying some more attention to oil spills, maybe even measures for prevention. I'm just wondering, maybe Ksenia or Yuri, you have an assessment of, is the Kerch Strait going to change anything in terms of oil spill prevention?
Ksenia?
Thank you for the question. Honestly, I don't think that it will systematically change something with the oil spill prevention in Russia, because it's not the first oil spill, even in Kerch Strait. In 2007, it was absolutely the same episode with the same type of vessel, with the same consequences. Were there taken any measures to improve the situation with the rescue and liquidation of the oil spill? No. Now we see Putin's reaction after how many days? Like a month from the accident. After 1 month from the accident, he finally spoke about it and raised some concerns about the fleet, which was there already like 50 years. So honestly, for the current Russian government, environment have never been a priority, even before the war. So now, with less money available for this, with less need to meet international environmental standards and criteria, I don't think that we will have any improvements in reactions to oil spills or any other environmental damages.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, Tim Nichols, Duke University. My first is a request. Would you be able to make these slides available, the slides for the presenters with source material? Will that be on your website?
Yeah, yeah. I am not sure if it will be on the website of Arctic Frontiers, but you can address me or anyone else, and we will send you the presentation.
They were very good, and I'd like to follow up on some of the sources.
We will exchange contacts.
So I have two short questions. My first question is for the gentleman who's talking about shipping, and it seems that that with the polar code, with the increased domain awareness, the investments in buoys and things in the Arctic, that the idea of no Arctic shipping, which you seem to promote, is not realistic. And I was hoping that for your question, you could address the counter argument, which is Arctic shipping is very economically attractive to countries both east and west. It sounds like the ship has sailed, so to speak, for Arctic shipping, and it sounds like it's much more in a regulatory phase. But you seem to promote an idea of no Arctic shipping. And then for the person who's working the nuclear issues, you didn't address the Russian nuclear barges, and if you would, the nuclear power plants on barges and the threat that they pose to the environment. I would love to hear about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. So we'll start with Sigurd to answer the first question, please.
Yeah. My conclusion was that it's dangerous, it's risky, and we should minimize it, and especially to try to use this Northern Sea route as an alternative to go the other way around the world, simply because we don't have the tools to make it sustainable. But anyway, we need to develop the technology to operate in the Arctic waters, simply because it's people there, it's cities there, it's communities there. They need supplies, and they need to bring out their products. So it's not a completely stop for shipping in the Arctic, but what's happening today and the Russian government's plan for using this for between Asia and Europe, it's still a bad idea.
Okay, thank you, Sigurd. And the second question about...
Talking about this floating plant, Academic Lomonosov, I mentioned it was on the slide. It was the third working power plant in the Russian Arctic. I mentioned three of them, but Kola and Bilibin are working for 50 years. Academic Lomonosov working since 2020. I was on them. So I mentioned the new plants. Russia now it's a contraction state. They already built 4 new floating plants near at Chukotka. But the main risk is that the number of nuclear facilities in Arctic will increase, so it will be a transportation of nuclear materials along the Northern Sea Road. And in this situation now, in this political situation, when Russia trying to hide everything, there is no collaboration, there is no exchange of information. So if something happened with these vessels and with other vessels, so Russia will hide everything, and there is no way to cooperate in eliminating some consequences of this. So it's in this war situation without collaboration, risks rise. But yes, it's one of their technology way for Russia to build these floating plants, because they cooperate also with China. China built the vessels for these plants. Russia built reactors, so we can say that it's a Russia-China project. China also interested in this. So I mentioned it, but I didn't have time to dig in details.
Okay, thank you, Dmitry. And we have one more question here, please. And then you, yeah, I see.
Thank you very much. Robert Sinclair, Senior Arctic Official for Canada. My question is about the impact of the Russian war on the people living in the Arctic beyond what has already been described. My stats are a little dated, about a year old. Before the casualty rates reached 1,500 a day, what we're seeing roughly now. So people from the Buryatia area, 97, 98 times more likely to be a casualty than someone recruited from Moscow or St. Petersburg. Chukotka, 30 to 40 more times likely. So I'd like to hear from panelists the impact of these numbers on communities in the Arctic, please. Thanks.
Thank you. Ksenia, maybe?
There are no certain numbers about how many people were recruited to the war from the Arctic communities, but what is definitely there is that the number of population in the Arctic cities is decreasing. And this is also a problem for decades now. In the state strategy, there is stated that there is a decline of the 10% per year, 2% per year, sorry. And they want to bring it to 0 by 2030. So with no decline. But I'm not sure it's realistic with the current state because the conditions of living in Russian remote cities are not improving. And money is not going there. Money is concentrated in Moscow. And now, more than usual, they are concentrated in the war budget. So there is not enough finance to support these communities and to build a proper infrastructure to let people stay there. They attract workers from elsewhere to Russian mining projects, as I said. That's also because there is a lack of people there, but also because this is like they don't want to attract local people working on that because they will see the demand for better conditions for people who don't live there. It's simply simpler for companies to just pay their money and that's it. So I think that we will continue to see the decrease in the population in the Russian Arctic.
Thank you, Ksenia, and I know that Andrei have something to add. Yeah.
Мы вместе с коллегами в ICPR и другими активистами активно собираем информацию о погибших и призванных на войну из числа коренных народов России.
We, with colleagues with ICPR, actively collect the data about the community, the representative communities that were recruited and died during the war.
И очень много фактов, когда призывают именно из числа коренных народов больше, чем из основного числа жителей России.
And it's true that there are a lot of facts when people from indigenous communities are recruiting more than ordinary people.
На это есть разные причины.
And there are different reasons for it.
Но факт есть факт, что больше всего из мест, где проживают на севере, из Арктики призывают больше всего представителей коренных народов.
But it's a true fact that from Arctic regions of Russia, the highest percent of recruited people, and they are from indigenous communities of Arctic region.
Приведу один пример.
One example.
Во время начала мобилизации в сентябре 22 года в селе Ловозеро было призвано 10 человек.
During the start of mobilization in the village of Lavozera in 2022, there were recruited 10 people, 10 person,
Из них было 7 человек сами.
and 7 of them were Sami.
На настоящий момент погибло уже 6 сами на войне.
And for today, there were 6 deaths of Sami during the war.
Чтобы понимать, в статистических цифрах это примерно 10% населения молодежи из числа сами.
So to make it statistically correctly, it's 10% of the youth population of the Sami. Okay, that is it. Any other questions, please? Yeah, this woman, please. And then I saw the hand, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentations. I'm Karen Ayalaraji from the Australian Embassy. Ksenia, thank you for your outline of Russia's plans for the extractive industries. Do you know where is most of the investment coming from for those projects?
Well, if you talk about the oil and gas industry, that's existing companies are investing. So for gas projects, it's Novatek and Gazprom. For oil, it's Rosneft. For mining, it's different investment destinations. They try to attract, well, it used to be European countries who invested in gas projects, for example, in LNG. Yamal LNG, which is still working now and continue to sell LNG to Europe, it used to be 20% of French Total. And also Japan. Same was for Arctic LNG too, but after the beginning of their war, they withdrew their investments. Also, Rosatom as a huge Russian corporation, nuclear corporation, but now I don't know, it's not only nuclear, it's just a super corporation covering everything, all nuclear projects, civilian and military. It operates the Northern Sea route. It takes under its control the shipping and major shipping companies in Russia. So they are trying to invest and develop some mining industries, some mining sites in the Russian Arctic. For example, lithium and palladium. They try to attract Chinese investments and Vietnamese investments and other countries from the Asia. But they are still, they are interested, but also very cautious about investing.
Yeah, thank you, Ksenia. So, and we had one more question there. Yeah. Raise your hand, yeah.
Hello, my name is Anushka Rajagopalan from the University of Edinburgh. I kind of had a two-part question, if that's okay. So my first question was, I think it was for the second speaker, talking about nuclear war, and then there was a slide on next steps, for example. And if I remember correctly, there were some bullet points about, when talking about next steps, things like doing more deployments of warheads and doing more underground testing. I'm wondering what's your perspective on how that changes the incentive for Russia to react to that, knowing that these next steps are taken by other countries. Would that incentivize them more in the future to take more drastic steps towards nuclear war, if I was understanding that slide correctly? And then my second step was just in relation to environmental and indigenous struggles in Russia itself. This might have been touched upon on the first question, but again, relating to oil spills with the first speaker, is there any significant efforts that can be done, at least across the border between Russia and other countries, for example, the Bering Sea in US territory, the Barents Sea in Norway? Is there any cleanup measures that could be significant enough to enact for oil spills, at least along those borders. And indigenous-wise, the third speaker talking about, his struggles as a perspective coming from someone, who isn't actively involved in Russian politics myself. What could I do as a third-party perspective to share that message of indigenous struggles in my own country, or again, where other people go back, how to spread that message more substantially are my questions.
Okay, thank you for your questions. I guess we will start with nuclear part first. And the question was...
Yes, but did I understand it correctly? You interested what Russian people think about perspective of nuclear war? Or?
I think if I wasn't understanding the slide correctly, when you were talking about the next steps going into nuclear war and doing things like underground testing, for example, I wasn't sure if you were talking about other countries' next steps or Russia's next steps.
Okay.
Next steps, I was wondering how will that incentivize Russia more in the future, reacting to that? Could that itself lead into more of a future step to go into nuclear war itself?
Okay, maybe it's not a part of my expertise because we are now talking about geopolitics and politics of international politics and other things. But I think that the China is the main limitation for Putin in his nuclear rhetorics, because no one knows nuclear war, of course, and Putin also don't want to die in nuclear war, and he understands that it will be his last step. And maybe he is not sure that if he press the button that everything will work. But I think it's not about technique, it's about people around him. But I think that he wants to use these things about nuclear because he likes to feel, to think like important person on international level because he has nuclear weapons. Of course he is. But he can only talk about it. And he used a lot of steps. I show some of them, and he has something in the future before the nuclear war starts. So he can conduct these explosions. But already on these steps, China will protest from this, I guess. So because China can do the same, and United States can do the same. And Putin said that we will conduct nuclear tests only after United States will do it. So we will be not the first. So I think that in this subject there are a lot of limitations, and the variation of next steps for Putin became smaller and smaller. And I think that we will stop on this point, and in some way we will find solution. Someone will find solution. Maybe Trump will do something to change this direction, because we are already in a very dangerous point. We are much closer to nuclear war than a couple of years ago. So.
Okay, thank you, Dmitry. And your next question was about preparedness for combat oil spills near the Russian borders and the preparedness of the other countries, right? Sigurd? Yeah, please.
I don't know the situation in the Bering Strait specifically. I know that Norway and Russia has an agreement on oil spill preparedness. So there is something. My fear is that if the shadow fleet increase in using the Northern Sea route, it's hard to make steps to lower the risk, but there is possibilities. If you ask the oil companies, they have always been interested in Arctic oil exploration around the world. They have invested a lot of money into improve the tools. Maybe it's improved 7 or 8%. But the best way to reduce the risk is to reduce the use of heavy fuel oil, to use alternative energy. I mean, in the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, have a goal of 40% lower CO2 emission in 2035. So the future will look different, and oil spill risk should follow this path downward.
Okay, thank you, Sigurd. And your third question was to Andrei from Sami people, and if I understood right, it was what he can advise to the people who are fighting for indigenous people rights in their countries to be heard by the government, right?
Да, мой ответ очень простой.
My answer will be very easy.
Нужно бороться и не сдаваться.
You need to fight and don't
Бороться.
give up, and don't give up. And we have time for one more question. Anyone? That's great. We did it on time. Lunch is soon. Give a big round of applause to our speakers. And also, please scan the QR code, subscribe to our news, and stay with us in our fight. Thank you so much for coming.